We're talking about vibe coding and the power of curiosity, curation, and judgment over knowledge. And then we dive into a little bit around the CTE differences in programs between schools and geographies, especially around experience building and how do we get young people to have more access to experiences.
And I get a little bit excited in this episode about Nate bringing up curation. So we talk more about curation. I talk about something called Italian brain rot, which if you haven't heard of it, good for you. And Nate gives me 45 seconds to write a song. It's not my best song, but it is original in the way that an AI song is original. So stay tuned. Hey, Nate.
Hey, Mason, looking forward to catching up today.
I know. It feels like it's been a bit this time. We are conveniently matching for our listeners. So to make it even harder to tell us apart. And I think you got a plant behind you in this new Vantage. So you're just really coming for me.
A plant and some
Oh my,
great elementary school, actually early childhood, incredible art by my kids.
that one on the left is like, or I guess my left. You're the dark blue one on. So you're right. Is pretty enticing.
One is that looks like a pheasant looking at the sun.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say it looks like a crow in the evening. So
Oh, well, that's pretty good. That's good. That's
it's
good.
close. Well, it's great to see you. I think that it's been a kind of wild week. I feel like I've had a brain sort of focus on one thing, and I've been seeing it everywhere I look. So I think our listeners are gonna be able to tell that today a little bit. But what did you see this week? Let's start with you.
I was all over the place. My brain was not focused on any one thing, so maybe we're the exact opposite. So my news and openings are going to be a little bit all over the place. So one is that I was playing around with this platform called Replit, Replit. We'll put it in the show notes, and some of our listeners might have heard about it. And it's really an AI coding agent. And so I've long been interested in how do you take great ideas and put them into action really quickly and create prototypes. And I've done a few ed tech solutions, and we've always had to wireframe them either on pencil or paper or put them into a slide deck and then show what would a clickable button do and where would this go, and you replicate different screens on your website. So in this case, I used Replit and just gave it a few lines of text and then spent about 3 hours just working through it, and it gave me a fully functioning launched website after 3 hours with my annual or monthly fee of $15. And so this idea of vibe coding, which I heard about afterward, is what I was doing. And vibe coding is just using normal language and not coding language to create an actionable product. And I think this is the future. And it allows ideas to come to fruition really, really quickly. And so you could create a huge number of websites and try different prototypes and A/B testing them, et cetera, without a whole lot of investment of coding time. And then that led me to think about all these states. I think it's about 44 states now have computer science standards. If everybody's learning coding, but then coding becomes obsolete because of vibe coding, what happens? So that's kind of what my opening has been thinking about is, are we teaching the right thing? And is computer science really up to date? What are your thoughts on vibe coding?
Wow, I have so many questions. I mean, for a long time, I freelanced as building websites for folks. So I have sort of some back end experience of websites, knowing all of the frustrations that like a web developer can have, partially with the impossible question of, can you make me a site that does this? And you being like, I think so. Like maybe. Basically, is there a plugin that does that? Is the answer, or can I copy paste that from somewhere? So Replit is just taking all of that off of your hands. I do think it's the future. I'm curious. I haven't messed around with it. So on the back end, would you have the ability to like connect it to Stripe or like a payment processing platform? Like how fully functioning can you make this as the front end of an interactive
So
space?
I was able to connect it to Getting Smart resources just by saying, go do a web crawl on the Getting Smart website and
Okay.
look for these keywords. I don't know how it APIs or something into another site, but I suspect that that's possible, and it'll ask for some sort of code to do that.
Totally fine. I mean, I think the second that APIs are an easy process, this will be like just immensely valuable. I could see, I've been messing around with some print on demand services for something recently, and the ability to just go like, I'm a student with an idea, or anybody with an idea, Nate with an idea, and you're like, I want to sell a t-shirt that says catching up season one, fan since season one, or something like that. if you make one of those, if that idea for a shirt, go into a free Canva, design a graphic, upload it to a print on demand service, and then you say, oh, I'm going to build a quick website in Replit, going to sync it to a marketplace like Stripe or Square, sell this shirt. You don't have to order any inventory, and suddenly people are just buying this shirt through this custom website that you've made, and you did it in like an hour, the whole
Yeah,
thing.
and it
And
makes me think, and I heard a podcast about this a while ago when agents were emerging a couple months ago, is this idea of the sort of 24-hour business launch where
wow,
any human, and let's imagine high school students, right? Because we talk a lot about real world learning, but anyone could say, I've got a good idea. Let's work with my AI co-pilot to refine it and figure out if there's a market, et cetera. Let's jump on a Replit, launch the platform. If it links to Stripe, like you were saying, let's link it to a pay service. And then the other thing they were saying is applying for the sort of LLC license with your state, like really quickly filling out that application and getting that in, so you have a
oh
tax
wow,
code. And so all these things that are the steps in starting and launching a company are I think going to be really, really compressed. And so that then means, what if you 1,000x the number of options out there on especially e-commerce or things that are sold online? What does that do to the market?
that's amazing. I mean, frankly, that is, and I saw a prototype that you were working on, and it was even able to bake in like a login interface, which is usually something that you have to pay someone else to do, to like create the membership portal and kind of manage all that. So it's really interesting what is possible when you can just speak it.
Yeah, and
And
it baked in the AI agent, right? Like
yeah,
I asked it to build an AI coach that looked at getting smart resources, which we already have on our website. But I was curious if it could build it right into this prototype I was building, and sure enough, it did that. And so it was tapping into GPT or something like that. And I just think that this observation this last 2 weeks kind of made my jaw drop to say, are we teaching the right things? And
mhm.
how do we actually keep up over the next couple of years in teaching the right things? And I think we're going to get into that in the show today. So I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, no, me too. And I mean, on the same subject of AI, I've been messing around with the new O3 reasoning model from GPT, which, like, for anybody who's not as in the AI world, basically, this is a new language model from ChatGPT, and it basically thinks before it responds. So the response time is a little longer, but you can follow its whole logic train as to what it's doing on the back end. And it was pretty fantastic. Like, I was really impressed with the results. I was giving it fairly opaque requests as well, like being, can you do a survey of these 15 United States learner wallets and audit whether or not like students have ownership for life in there? And also, can you take a look internationally and give me 10 more examples? And it would go do this thing that like is hard information to find if you are a human being knowing where to look. And so it was really impressive. So these models are just getting really capable and really letting you skip some of the steps that were super time intensive but not very rewarding uh, before.
Yeah, in
So
terms of it, yeah, and let me give you one more example, and then I have
yeah,
a pushback. I'm going to ask you, is that so? Today was working for a partner, and I had a list of, I don't know, 70 districts and school districts, and I wanted to know the data on free and reduced lunch, racial ethnic backgrounds, number of students, number of high schools, number of middle schools, number of elementary schools, and so I directed it to the NCES database, which is miraculously still alive at the federal government. Hopefully that
that's
stays, because that's a really important resource for a lot of us.
yeah,
But I said, just go to this database, search for the school that's in my list, and then provide all this information and give it to me in a Google sheet that I can then use. And it did it. And I that probably would have been either me or someone else, I don't know, 5 hours of time to do that. But suddenly I can get that work out of the way and do the analysis work and the curiosity and questioning work that I really wanted to get to. My question is so I did this, and then I was saying to myself, well, how do I check this?
yeah.
Because we know that things hallucinate still. It's not perfect. And then, which I have not tested yet, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on this, is I was thinking, well, could you use another AI agent, another
Yeah.
LLM from another company, and actually cross-reference it and say, can you check this database and see if that works? So I'm wondering if you've done that at all.
I've actually just resubmitted it back in the exact same feed and just been
Oh,
been like, do the same thing, check this for accuracy, and just seen what it comes up with. And if I've ever done that when I had doubt, it did catch the error on the upload
oh,
again. It was like,
interesting.
this is actually a little bit elaborated, or like this is kind of an inference. It's not overtly stated.
Okay.
Um, I will say the '03 one, when I pulled it, it was like, it was fully correct. I cross-referenced a bunch of the things and I was very surprised. I think that those layers of additional reasoning added a level of fact checking. I don't think that's true for all of them, but yeah, so I do think that would work if you have sort of this truth bot that you can submit it back to, or even in the same thing. Because if it doesn't find the same thing twice, it's not it is very unlikely to hallucinate on the same thing 2 times and for
Yeah,
coming at it from 2 different directions. It's already feeling a little bit like the imagination is the limit of what you can do. Like, you
right.
just
Which
kinda.
means we need to develop more imagination and curiosity. What else have you seen this week that you're interested in?
Yeah. My thing that I'm just seeing everywhere is this idea of curation. I think that
Mm,
it's always been one of my favorite topics ever since, like, making a mixtape, for people, or maybe a mixed playlist, given it how what technologies I came up with. There's an abundance out there. How do you curate a handful of things to sort of tell a specific story that you're wanting to tell? And I saw a few things this week that made me think of it, and then we're gonna talk even more later about it. But one of them,
no, no, no,
so
don't do it. You have to
I
leave it. We have to
I
leave
have
things in that.
I have a friend who is, like, painfully online. He is one of those painfully online people who can tell you all of the weird deep lore of the internet. And there's this thing right now called Italian brain rot, which is this whole subgenre of fictional AI generated characters that only exist, like, in social media reels, basically. So, like, Instagram reels, which is like their TikTok version. So he follows this person named Taylor Lorenz, who's kind of like the Generation Alpha Gen Z whisperer for the New York Times. And Taylor Lorenz is always doing these very intelligent thoughts about dumb things. That's kind of like her MO. And so he sent me this thing about Italian brain rot. And I want to get your knee jerk, because mine was a certain way. Basically, there are all these AI generated characters that now have Instagram accounts. So one of them is named John Pork. It is a pig that is a man with a pig head. There's one that is called Bambaleo Bambala, I think, which is a Italian shark that's wearing sneakers. And they've come from all of these people, and they have these profiles, but basically people are creating these stories about them, and then over time, based on engagement, it will dictate which of the characters survive. And now all of those people have been imprisoned by the police in a fictional storyline that is driving millions and millions of hits. And it's like this fully co-curated story. Like, if you want to tell the next phase of Bambaleo's chapter, you can do it. But if you don't get enough likes to keep it high up in the list, that didn't actually happen to Bambala. So, like, I am I am so fascinated by this as, like, an emerging curation and storytelling trend.
I have a
I
lot of questions,
I mean,
Mason. I have a
yeah,
lot of questions.
yeah, I have a lot of questions for my friend as well, but yeah, it's fascinating, and it's yeah, go ahead.
So, well, first of all, I looked it up, Italian brain rot famous characters, and I see Yadobi. It's in Walmart, so it must be selling on something, and it's a frog that's embedded in a tire, and some sort of shark sneaker person that you talked about, and
Yeah,
then this gorilla banana guy keeps showing up over and over again. It's a green gorilla in a yellow banana, and then a teacup
okay.
woman. So it
Mm.
looks like a latte head or something like that. So this is crazy and a little bit ludicrous, and uh, so connect me again to the curation because
I've
this
broken
is
the
like a crowd curating a real time iteration storyline of fake characters. I think.
it's co-curation in the sense that nobody has IP. It's like all fictional AI made it. So it's just like you can use these things wherever you want. So everyone's invited in. And then it's really just this, like, strange world where the story ends based on how the people want the story to end, which is like a kind of weird new way to face entertainment. So I don't know. It just, as someone who loves stories, as someone who's really interested in entertainment and art, like, just struck me super strange. And again, if students are going to come in knowing how to do this kind of thing, similar to your AI question, it's like making them read this old book, which I love to do. That's just going to feel so alien to them. Like, it's
Yeah.
like, why can't we just make this story? Why can't we have this story go in new directions?
Right. The agency and control. We've talked a lot about learner agency, learner centered, and even a learner driven curriculum that's catching and hitting all the standards and outcomes and competencies that are needed. But this takes it even a step further of you're creating storylines and upvoting and downvoting. And I think you're onto something that we probably need to continue to think about, which is this increasing gap between the lived experience of young people and what they're learning in school. And this has always been the case. This is not
Right.
only now, but it feels like the gap is accelerating more and more and more. So,
Totally.
wow.
No, I
Okay.
just,
That's
it
crazy.
really struck. Yeah, no, it's absolutely wild. I don't know if I encourage anyone to go Google Italian brain rot, but if you do, don't tell them Mason sent you, and you'll get at least a laugh out of some of the things that. And then on the other piece of this curation front, the first of many today, I just saw an article in the New York Times this week, sort of on the opposite side of the spectrum, which is that the MoMA in New York is one of many museums that is actually decreasing the amount of years of experience you need in order to become a curator. They're trying to get more young people in to curate the collections that they have. So they dropped it from, I think
Mm.
it was 14 years of experience to 10 years of experience. And that just stood out to me for a couple of reasons. But really, last week we talked a little bit about early education and the way that they're trying to make that age bracket lower in certain states, drop it from, I think, 16 years to 14 years, which we both sort of were like, interesting, with a raised eyebrow of like, tell me more. But then we see this thing that like Ryan Craig talks about a lot in our work about the experience gap. So it's this
Yep.
idea that like it's going to be really hard to find that first job. It's just going to be asking more and more experience, and AI will take a lot of those entry level roles. So it's like, where do people actually get their foot in the door? So I just found them as like these kind of interesting inverse directions that like it's not the same thing right now, but there's certain places that are asking for less and less experience in order to engage a younger population and to get new perspectives. And then there's all these other things that are like, oh, you actually have to be probably quite a bit further along in your career or have had really robust pathways in your high school. So it just struck me as like kind of an inverse trend and something that I'm generally pro. Like we should have younger curators. We need museums to be really places of belonging for all people. But anyway, it just stood out to me. So
Yeah, and it makes me think is, and we talked about this a little bit about the that young people are from an early age, if they've been on technology, they're getting a lot of experience in curation, like you were
yeah.
saying. So the skill of curation, I can understand what Mom was doing. They're saying, hey, you have more experience than some of our 30-year veterans in this curation department. They don't necessarily have experience in whatever, discerning what art goes where, or whatever the case may be. But that's an interesting choice to tap into. Recognize that there is this a skill that perhaps the younger generation has that older generations don't have.
Yeah, and I mean it's just it's really interesting because it is so subjective too. Like it is like if you put the picture behind you of the crow or whomever in the daylight or moonlight next against a Monet and a um we'll say like a Basquiat or something, just in a
Or the
museum,
banana taped to the wall.
or the banana taped to the wall, exactly. And you've curated that to tell some sort of experience, whatever that is. Like you can, all of the paintings mean something a little different within the context that you set for them. So it
Sure.
is a really interesting uh, way to tell stories, kind of adjust meanings of works. Yeah. So I don't know. Interesting trend.
Yeah,
Glad the
super
moment doing it.
interesting trend. And I think that's a great segue into our deep dives this week because
Yeah.
there's an article. So there's a book coming out called Reshuffle by Paul Chowdhury, who writes this blog, and we'll put the link in his Substack, his link into our show notes. And the title of the blog was "Humans as Luxury Goods in the Age of AI," and you and I shared it together, and I think we share it to our team. But I think it's worth it for us to riff a little bit on this because it connects to our opening. And so the summary I have is this: is that there are four things that you think about in terms of when you are learning and doing something with your learning. So number one is curiosity. So how do you ask good questions? How do we determine what we want to learn? And then number two is the accessibility to knowledge. So what's the knowledge that's out there that will help satisfy my answer? And then you get all this knowledge, which is getting bigger and bigger and more AI generated over time. And it's hard for us to put it all together. So we go into this idea of you need to curate it, which you were just alluding to with Italian brain rot and MoMA. And then there's a fourth piece, which he put on there, which I think was really interesting, which was judgment, which is what do you do with the curated set of information to have some sort of impact or something happen, right? Like there's some
Mhm.
action you take. So again, you have curiosity. What do I want to know? Knowledge, you access this vast knowledge base. Curation, then you filter that down to something that's relevant, and then you do something with it, whatever that is. And that may be, we hope that it's purpose-based, but it may not be. And so Paul Shattery in this book called Reshuffle talks about this, and the blog gives an overview of it, and it's coming out soon. He then the second part of the blog was what's going to be in demand as a talent, right?
Mm.
And so we know that knowledge is no longer the demand piece. Just because you know a lot of things won't matter because everybody can access knowledge, with a couple keystrokes. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't have, we talked about core knowledge and core skills, and those things are important: reading, writing, mathematics, et cetera. At least right now, I think we're still bullish on that. But this idea that knowledge is really uniform and fully accessible to a lot of people. So what's going to become the signal? We talk a lot about signaling, the signaling for talent. And he argues, all right, well, the signaling is curiosity, curation, and judgment rather than knowledge. And those are the things that will be more scarce. And so young people and adults who are upskilling need to think about, how am I developing my curiosity? How am I developing my curation skills? And how am I developing my judgment skills? And so then that led me down to, all right, well, if curiosity, curation, and judgment are things that we are going to set some folks apart from others in terms of getting hired or whatever the case may be, how do you capture this via the learning model? So signals are just an indication of what you've learned. And so the learning model, I was thinking, well, curiosity, things like Reggio Emilia pre-K programs. Both my kids went through that, and it's amazing. They're always starting with generative questions from the students, which then they tie in the learning that they need to tie in. So great student-centered project-based learning. Science inquiry, the NGSS, Next Generation Science Standards, the practices and cross-cutting themes are all about asking good questions and making observations. I always recommend question walls for some of our partner schools, which is, have a piece of poster paper on your wall that whenever a question gets asked in class that you don't have time for, you don't know the answer for, throw it on the question board or the question wall. Because all these questions are leading to sort of this idea of curiosity and developing curiosity in young people. And then curation, this was a little bit harder for me. It's like, where do we do this in schools? And I mean, I guess we do it when we're doing research, because you're doing research and you have to filter. Portfolio work is probably a really good curation practice, and more schools need to do that. Use of AI as a co-pilot to help curate. So curation was harder for me, and I'm curious about your opinion there in a second. And then the judgment piece, I feel like judgment is what is developed through experience. And this ties back to, how do we have young people get more experiences doing real things? Because you gain judgment. You can curate something. You gain the judgment of what to do with it based on your prior experiences and context and culture, et cetera. And so it feels like something, the universities like Northeastern, who has a co-op experience, has been around for 30 or 40 years, has suddenly become one of the more highly selective colleges or universities in the country, because it builds in experience into their higher education experience. And then, of course, work-based learning and internships and real-world learning in Kansas City that we're doing. And so if we go back to this idea that we're trying to signal curiosity, curation, and judgment rather than knowledge, and what are those learning models to develop those things, that's what I'm interested in. This reshuffle book is very thought-provoking for us who are in the education space, saying, what on earth should we be teaching skills and knowledge? So I know you read the blog. Did you have a different takeaway? Same takeaway?
I think that the big takeaway is, like, knowledge is what schools have been. Like, that is truly the focus point of what schools have been to date, is the knowledge component. I think it's like this transfer of knowledge. And so that is something that I'm like, it fundamentally reshifts schools in the way that we were talking about earlier. And I think one thing that's, like, he didn't say in the blog, but I think is really interesting, is schools are one of the most intergenerational places on earth. And that is not something that anybody uses as an asset. Like, we use it as a way of being like, oh, this person is going to teach you knowledge because they are older. But, like, all three of these things are so supercharged by doing that in intergenerational spaces where you have perspectives from a wide group of people. So I think applying it to the school context, there's also this really cool communal element that's like doing this with peers and with intergenerational members of your community, just because they're either teachers or faculty or whomever, just really, I think, augments this and brings in these super cool, diverse experiences that make all of these more valuable. Those are two quick reactions to the piece itself. I think you also asked about other places where we curate in school. And I agree, it's not something that we do a lot in school settings, but I do think that, like, fundamentally, when you are choosing the classes that you want to take at school, choosing the extracurriculars that you're wanting to do, like, we're always kind of curating this life's journey by choosing what we do and don't do. And so I do think that students are curating how they want to show up to their peers, both online and, like, by what they wear to school every day. They're also doing it through these other kind of more maybe long-term curation, where you're choosing something that, like, I'm going to be a soccer player. Like, I love doing this, and it's this thing I want to do. So you've curated, like, sort of that as a part of your life. And that leads to another set of curations where, like, soccer players may behave a certain way, or they may have a certain style tendency, or they definitely had certain haircuts when I was in high school. So I think that that's also kind of an interesting piece, is like curating both on a short term and a long term time horizon is something.
Yeah, and it makes me think in the core, that the learner layer, which is the core layer of our framework, we talk about the learner, right? We talk about, do you understand self, who you connected with, and we use the word pathway because we've been talking a lot about pathways. But it makes me think that we actually need to talk a lot about curation of pathway in that part of our framework, which we were really thinking about what are the pathways that are that young people have opportunities to pursue. So I know who I am. I know where I want to get to. Here's the pathway that someone has prescribed for me. But I like to incorporate some of this work into that around how do you curate a learning pathway and what does that look like? Because it ties to our unbundled ecosystem work. And it's sort of a connecting piece that might be really, really interesting for us.
Yeah, and it ties to workforce trends, like everybody changing their jobs. Like I don't remember the number now, but it's like 13 times in their lifetime for people who are currently in high school. So it's like
Right.
that is a very curated learning pathway that's pretty unpredictable. Like that not everybody who starts in this field will end up. I studied music, songwriting, and music business and literature, and was not expecting to get into education, for example.
Let's go back on something really serious. You mentioned soccer player haircuts. So let describe to me, because I'm about 20 years older than you ish.
It would have been like the 20 teens.
20 teens, right? So how would you describe the soccer player haircuts?
Early 20 teens, early 20 teens.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it was always, so I would say that it was very cleaned up around the ears. So like very shaven here,
Yeah.
generally a little longer on top. And I would say depending on sweatband or no sweatband, it would have a pretty different amount of like pomp to it.
We were definitely in just mullet land. It was pretty straightforward. It was shaved on the sides, long on the top, and long on the back. And that was what it was in New England in the 80s.
Yeah.
Okay. That was a digression.
No, and if we get 10 more reviews on our podcast before next week, we will post a photo of Nate with the mullet from the 80s. So just saying.
That might take 15 more likes, but I like
Okay.
this incentive-based listening. So this is really kind of like Italian brain rot, where we are driving incentives, except that people are not voting us on the island or off the island along the way. So
correct. No, we're staying on the island. It's just a matter of how much fun are you going to have on the island with us, is I think the question of our crowd curated time right now.
All right. So we've got curiosity, knowledge, curation, judgment. That's been a little bit of a through line. That's sort of my deep dive. What about you? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of want to riff on that topic a little more for my deep dive this week. I've been talking a lot with like learner wallet, LER type companies, people thinking a lot about credentialing and this curation of pathways that you were just talking about, actually. And so I just wanted to sort of think out loud with you and see if we could come up with this piece that's like the user layer of LERs, right? Like I think something that you and I have alluded to on this show and in other conversations is what's going to make someone actually come and do this. It can't just be this like end assessment when you do a project, like how was it? I mean, that's so hard to know what to say. It's so hard to say anything that really adds value. But I think as we've made the case before on the show, like these records and these credentials are only going to be as valuable as the amount of information you can put into them. So that whether that's evidence or whether that's context or whether that's I was this role in this project, which means I did these tasks. I mean, I think everyone's gone to make a resume before, and like your positions don't really say much about what you did there, partially because we have kind of silly titling structures like in the world. They just are like, oh, this is a project manager. Like, what does that mean you did? And so until you go and actually do that work of being like, in this role, I did X, Y, and Z things, which demonstrated X, Y, and Z skills, like you haven't actually said much. So I think I just want to spend a little bit of time with you live thinking about places in our lives where we are capturing evidence of something over time, like learning journeys, but maybe not learning specific. And then just be like, can we think of how this would work to document a learning journey rather than just be this thing that we're submitting at the end of like an LMS grade cycle or something like that. So I have two questions to start us off, but I'm curious if you have a reaction first, because you looked like you were pondering.
No, I think it's a really good question, and my mind immediately went to how would AI help us track this? Good questions first before I go down into the black hole.
Okay, cool. Yeah, don't go there yet. So one, I know that you are a avid cyclist, exerciser extraordinaire, young boy energy for anyone listening who has not had the chance to ride a bike with Nate. But Do you track this fitness? Like how do you track your fitness, or do you at all?
Don't track it at all.
Okay. So
But
we are the two wrong people to talk about this because neither of us track our fitness, but are both active.
like I would say that my wife, who has she has a watch that tracks like sleep, for example, and
Okay.
that's sort of interesting. So that's an example of a lot of people are doing this biometric type tracking, and it's
Yeah.
done automatically. You don't have to think about it.
Right. And
You
I
click
like
at it, and it's done.
right. And I mean, like I know Tom uses Strava. Like a lot of people use these kind of other tracking tools that document your exercise and sort of
Yep.
allow you to post over time, whether you're progressing, whatever. If anybody's ridden a Peloton, it's sort of doing this as well. It's like documenting within app, sort of
And
how
here's an interesting side note on that is that my son uses Strava a lot because he likes to run, and he actually posts social media type. He doesn't use other social media like Instagram or Facebook or anything.
interesting.
Not that any young person uses Facebook, but the but he posts more social pictures on there as well. So he's using Strava as an exercise platform, but also posting some of his experiences on it as well, which is really interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah, I kind of do that with all trails a little bit, like leaving trail reviews when I go out and hike. And then I'm also curious. Some people have like really regular, like journaling practices or ways to sort of just like document how they're thinking on a more moment to moment basis. Do you have any kind of like recurring processing? You write for Getting Smart a lot. That may be part of it, but
Yeah, I think that's where I do it now. Ever since I started teaching in 1993. Actually, my senior year in college, I started journaling, and then I still have that journal. And then from 1993 onward, I journaled a lot about sort of my professional thinking, and
hmm.
did that until I moved over to Getting Smart, where I started writing more publicly. So it wasn't daily, but it was very routine, and it was a reflective practice for me on actually what I learned. Like, what was I learning from a particular scenario as a school leader, a school teacher, or whatever the case, whatever I was
Hmm.
doing. So do that. I did do that. I don't do it much anymore, except for more public work on it.
Great. So you used to do it. Did you ever, when you, back in that time when you were doing it, did you ever like reread those journals to get an even higher level sort of meta view of what do you like? What do you keep talking about that you're learning that maybe you weren't thinking about?
Yeah, I would say that more so when I was in school leadership, I would go back and reflect. And when I was teaching a little bit, uh, but it was often at the end of the year. It was a culminating period. At the end of the year, as a closing of a year, an academic year, I would read over my notes from that year, my journal from that year. So it wasn't a fast iteration. It was a slow iteration learning process. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think these are just like a couple examples of how I passively and actively do or don't interact with reflection, right? Like, I think reflection is a huge part of this building of documentation of credentialing that we're talking about, of like really showing your learning journey over time. And you alluded to AI doing some really, uh, potentially having some of that observation, but also maybe doing some of this higher level reflection or like sort of being a guide to be like, Nate, this year when you were a leader, like the beginning of the year, you wrote that this was really hard. And by the end of the year, you were talking about that like in stride. What does that say like about your year? What did you actually do during the year to get better at that?
Mm.
I I want to hear your thoughts on AI, but before I do, I was chatting with a company called Gobekli recently,
Oh yeah.
and they're great and they have some really interesting ways that they're thinking about this stuff as well. But they have these four different archetypes of stories that they say will filter into forming your sort of like your learning profile. So one is self-attested stories. I think that's the most self-explanatory. It's like I am putting in that I have done this thing and this experience. So if you, for the sake of all trails, if I went for a hike and just said that, then I have self-attested. If I like did my little GPS tracker and it logged that I was on the trail, that's technically something that is not just self-attested. That's like backed up by evidence.
Yeah.
They also have a surveyed story. So that is something that is collected from evidence. So that might be like the trail, that might be an assessment or like another data source. They also have credentialed stories. So that is something that actually has a value holding badge of recognition from somewhere else that says, like, hey, you've done this thing. This badge is sort of carrying all of that information inside of it. And then you have this thing called calculated stories, which is like an AI inferred skill or something like that. So I think historically that's been more like a machine learning, which is like, hey, you maybe for to take it into the health example, if it was doing your pedometer over time and on Monday you walked 6,000 steps and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you didn't really walk that much. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you walked a lot. Maybe it's like, oh, middle of the week was really busy at work, huh? Like that would maybe be like a calculated story based on your pattern.
Mm.
So I just think that's a really useful frame as we're about to go into
Yeah.
talking about this. So there's self-attested, there is surveyed, there's credentialed, and then there's calculated. And I think all of those are going to be a huge part of our learning journeys going forward. But
Okay, so let's go through each one of these and think about what actually exists out of the ecosystem. So self-attested has always been done in terms of teacher will have you write a reflection.
totally
The advent of AI is something like LibDex, that platform, which you self-attest, but then it's extrapolating or extracting things and learning from it. So
right.
Schooljoy does this, Goblecki does this, and so it's the use of AI tools to extract information from your own reflection. The surveyed evidence base would be a portfolio, right?
Yep.
So those schools that use portfolios already, you already are in the process.
Mm,
Credentialed stories are interesting because it's really lived in the CTE world of industry recognized credentials.
totally.
But we're starting to see the emergence of seals at the state level. So, like Ohio seals, or Colorado has a seal of climate literacy. Ohio has 12 seals. You need to choose two or some number like that before you graduate. So, more and more states are adopting a graduation requirement that is an attached credential related to their portrait of a graduate if they have a state level portrait of a graduate. And then the calculated is interesting. Maybe that's the version of the merger of that self-attested with AI or something like that. But
Yeah.
all these things, I think what you're saying is that all these things are ways to extract experience, right, from a person's lived life,
Correct. Yeah,
right?
and I don't just think that they are ways, but my guess is for a record to actually be high fidelity, they have to all be like multimodal extraction methods because I think otherwise you are limited to how well someone can articulate something, or you're limited to a world just almost entirely of like micro credentials or something. Like you'd have to fully index on one of these that is both like verified by someone else and has a bunch of like sub data on it that would probably have some set of requirements around evidence. So I just think that this is a really interesting space. And there's a lot of conversation around LERs and badging, but there's just not really that much conversation around how do you get someone to actually do this work in a way that is both valuable to them and to the broader world audience who we're often documenting for. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're working on the supply side of this. You
Right.
and I talked a lot about supply and
Y-
demand in the school ecosystem, right? Like we're supplying a lot of new school models, but what's the demand on the parent side, higher ed side, employer side, student side, et cetera? And we need to work both sides of the equation. And I think this is a subset of that challenge, right? Is
I
that we're
agree.
working on the supply side of how can we create really interesting digital learning wallets, and the question is what goes in it that is actually has value to others,
Yeah.
and maybe there's a separate part of this which is the demand side of like why would a learner want to do this,
Right.
right?
Well, and
Like, what would compel a learner to actually do something, which I think is your driving question here.
it is. And I think that the challenge with all of this, and part of the reason it's urgent, is I think that the assessments we've had for a long time, or like the literacies and competencies we've had for a long time, uh, take just literacy for
Yep.
example. I think those will be oftentimes on screen enough that you can have passive assessment going on and not that much will change. Take like a Miro learning or something like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Like that can share data in real time on the back end. That could be stored in your learning journey. Like, so that's going to have evidence of that competency. But for the stuff that you and I and Getting Smart talk about so much being value holding, which is these like out in the world experiences, these real world things, it's
Yeah.
going to be really hard to ever actually have something that's kind of riding tandem with you unless we're all doing wearable Google glasses that are live streaming up to our user profile cloud all the time or something, which is a future. I just We have to figure out a way to actually bridge that gap if we're going to keep talking about these being valuable experiences. So that's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
outgoing
And it makes
theme.
me think about the development of like, how do you document if we think that Chattery's right and curiosity, curation, and judgment are the important superpowers to differentiate those different skill sets among individuals. Like, how do you use the Gobekli attestments around curiosity?
Totally.
You could see a prompt saying, "How many questions did you do last hour?" But that'd be an impossible thing. It'd be so contrived. So I don't have the answer to it, but I think it is a really good question. If we want to allow learning ecosystems to expand and we want to document them in some sort of learning and employment record, uh, there need that we're expanding the ecosystem. The LER technology is happening, but the connection may be something that you're alluding to is missing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you put your finger on something very astute, which is that I'm always obsessed with the demand side of things, and I think it's if I had to lay on the fainting couch for a little bit and talk to someone about it, I think it's because when you write poetry, there's just no demand for it, and so
Right.
I think I'm just always obsessed that there's like, oh, there's a demand side issue in this world.
But
Um,
we often forget about it in the education
yeah,
space, right? We like to build things, and we don't necessarily think about education from the business perspective of supply and demand.
yeah,
And I do think it's something that we as educators need to think about a little bit more. What would make people really want this? And that bumps head on into the, well, they just need it question, right? And so it doesn't matter if they want it or not, they just need it. But actually, I'm not sure that's how economies of learning work, right? I actually
mm,
think that, yeah, you may be able to deliver it, but if your engagement is low, you're not going to get the outcomes that you want out of your students. And so you have to build the demand side. And it's, you go into any school and ask people who's their most favorite teacher, the most challenging and most high quality relationships. And almost every school will have a handful that people say. And
yeah,
it's pretty typical that it is a handful. It's not all the teachers there. It's a handful of those teachers. And so those teachers are in demand. The students are saying, I would rather have those teachers. We do it at university as well. Like, that's why those platforms exist for Rate My Teacher or whatever the case may be, right?
right.
Because good teaching, good education is in demand. And so we do need to think about the demand side.
Strongly agree. All
Right.
right,
Right.
that was a deep dive. What
That
else
was a
do you have
deep,
for us
deep
this week?
dive. I just had one. This is not a, this is a shallow dive, but it just made me think a little bit. I just want to throw out a few examples. I had a great conversation with Mike Gonzalez and some others down in, he's down in Texas, and he runs the Rural School Innovation Zone. And they are really trying to figure out how do you create really good CTE opportunities in rural places when they're just, you're remote and you're isolated. And then so I want to, so they've created this RSIZ, Rural Schools Innovation Zone. Each of 5 districts offers one pathway, and they bus between pathways. That's really interesting, and it's been really
Mm,
effective. And they're going to launch a few more of these in Texas. Uh, then you compare that to our town hall where we had St. Vrain on, which is, Boulder, Colorado, 54 schools, over 30,000 students, and they have every CTE program under the sun, and they have a 50,000 square foot innovation center, and a P-Teach, a P-Tech, a mobile innovation lab. Like, their robotics clubs are ridiculous. They have more robotics clubs than probably every rural school in the state of Wyoming in one
yeah,
school district, right? And so I understand that these are urban compared to rural districts. But what I'm really interested in, and I want to put a placeholder in, is if experience is an important signal, how do we help students who don't have access to a lot of experiences get more experiences?
mm,
And that then made me think of, we need to create a much more robust virtual internship experience for high school students.
mm,
And that exists at the higher ed with Ripen, but we don't have a high school version yet, right? So we need a more robust ecosystem around internships. And what does that look like? And with the on the call with Mike and I was ECI, who runs Full Mind Learning, which is real time virtual humans that are helping rural schools meet teacher shortages, because they actually
mm.
are helping deliver those classes that they're not able to deliver. And we were starting to riff on, like, what would that look like for virtual internships, and how could we test this out in down in Texas in the Rural Schools Innovation Zone, and how do we help rural kids get virtual internships that allow them to potentially do remote work that'll allow them to stay in their rural communities and rural regions, but also bring money and cash into those regions where they need it the most. And so that's a shallow dive into this idea that every student's experience in schools in the world is vastly different from every other student's experience. And when it, not only
Mm.
student to student in a school, but then even more student to student when you look at locale differences of urban versus rural, suburban, et cetera. So that's a sort of a medium dive into something I want to investigate further about this. How do you do more real world experiences for those who don't have access to real world experiences?
Totally. And I think that's such a useful way to widen social networks and social capital and all those things at the same time as
Yeah,
well.
and it's all
It's about the
connected, right?
experience and yeah.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
And
So
if we can increase social capital by increasing experiences, if we can increase experiences by creating more virtual opportunities, then it's a virtuous positive cycle, right? And it hits a lot of things at once that are really missing from the ecosystem of a huge number of student experiences across the country.
mm, that's that's great. Well, that is a hopeful way to wrap our dives today. I as always, we wrap up with something a little bit more human. We talked a little bit about Italian brain rot, which I'm not sure is at all human. I debated putting it in here though, but that is like maybe.
It is uniquely human in the AI world, maybe.
That is true. That is true. But and this week, I just was listening to a podcast last Friday. It was on the On Being podcast with Krista Tippett, and she was interviewing David Bornstein, who's the head of the Solutions Journalism Network, which is just a group of. It's an organization that I've been following for a while, and I think it's something that you and I talk a lot about. It's this idea that like there's just a proclivity for bad news, basically. The old adage, if it bleeds, it leads, is like kind of the way that they used to talk about it on a newspaper. Like if it was like a murder,
Exactly.
and we just put it at the top.
Humans love looking at the tragedies of others. It's terrible.
No, I know. And the example he actually gave in this episode was we ran a survey with with these journalists, and we basically said that there was a story where a district, their literacy rates dropped by 50%, and there was a district where their literacy rates grew by 50%. Which story are you taking? And all of them picked the one where the literacy rates fell. And he was like, that's so interesting because that exclusively tells you either what not to do or external conditions that they couldn't control. And the other one tells you the things that they could control and like what they were able to do to grow it.
And
So
actually,
why are we focused? Yeah. So I just, Solutions Journalism Network is awesome. And it just, for me, really embodies what we try to do at Getting Smart, which is focusing on these moments of innovation and solutions that are worth amplifying and worth sharing. So that just is a really great place to go if you're looking for some belief in humans and the work that we're all doing together. So
I love it. I'll go and check that out.
yeah.
What I want to share is I was thinking there was an article in the Atlantic by Arthur Brooks and really talking about unhappiness in the world and just a couple things around unhappiness and number one, driven by data that more people under 30 are unhappy in the United States. And he sort of questioned that data a little bit in the survey methodology, but then he went and it referenced a project called the Human Flourishing Project out of Harvard that does a lot more robust surveys and was starting to think about the connection between GDP and happiness and how there's an inverse correlation, right? So as GDP goes up, happiness goes down. And that's after some sort of plateau to deal with basic Maslow's hierarchy of survival, right? When you have enough food, shelter, you're safe. So you need some level of income to get there. But then after that, it's a diminishing return. And when you dig into it, the three things that cause or drive happiness or flourishing, one of them was purpose. So do you have a purpose in your life? And that purpose doesn't have to be professional. It could be raising kids. It could be caretaking for neighbors, whatever the case may be. But purpose, introspection. So are you thinking deeply about yourself and the world? You have this, as humans, we have these amazing brains that are able to self-reflect and be metacognitive. And then community, like how are you interacting with the world around you and other humans? And so when we at Getting Smart, we're thinking about these things. We think about reflection for young people and how we give them opportunities to reflect. We think about purposeful work, and we think about collaborative. You and I have talked a lot about the power of we've got to be working towards a common goal in a group, not just solely in front of a screen developing concrete technical skills or core skills. And so we talk a lot about education, what should happen in schools, and a lot of examples and technical stuff. And sometimes it's helpful to take a step back and say, all right, how purposeful are our lives?
Yeah.
How much are we doing in some introspection and what do our communities look like? And that will potentially increase well-being for a lot of people. So that's my take on human expression this week.
I love it. 2 takeaways from that. 1, a great way to start is to start a daily journal, as we talked about earlier. And 2, it's a lot easier to do collaborative work if you all have matching haircuts.
That is good. And just don't make me write a poem a day because that will be probably the biggest challenge that I would ever have.
I actually might make that on. If we can get 100 reviews by next week, Nate will write a poem every day. For
30-day poem a day challenge if we can get 100 reviews on from our listeners.
Please do that. All right, Nate, it's been great. Let's get to the Guess That Song portion.
All right.
All right, so this week, I'm going to try to do my best impersonation of Suno, the AI music generator that we often use on this show. Nate's going to give me a prompt. I'm going to take a generous 30 seconds to create a short verse chorus combo for our song, And I guess we don't have to guess the prompt because you're giving it to me live. So this is a little bit of a flip. We're only 4 episodes in and we're already changing the format. Be kind to me, Nate. I have an acoustic, so like no Motley Crue, no Sabbath.
I don't know if you're going to know this. I'm going to give you 3 choices. I'm going to go the Monkees.
Okay.
Prince.
Oh God. Okay.
And the Lumineers.
Ooh, if I was more warmed up, I'd go Prince. I used to cover Kiss by Prince a lot at shows as like my last. I don't know if I can. Frankly, my wife might be on a call in the other room, and I don't know if I can control my volume enough on that one. Let me try the Monkees. It's the last meeting of a Monday, and I got you on the phone. It's just Nate and Mason. Yeah, we're here talking alone. No, don't be slow. It's the last meeting of Monday, and I got you on the phone. It's just 2 co-workers talking about what's going on. Oh, we're catching up. We're catching up.
It's the Monkees. That was the influence.
We got the Monkees. You're so good. All right, there we go. That is my fully ad-lib lyrics over Last Train to Clarksville by the Monkees.
I think there's going to be this huge push to AI, and then we're going to start coming back, and then humans are going to be imitating AI like we just did. We are probably the first people to do that, just so you know.
To be humans imitating AI. Yeah, that's actually true. Right. That is
You're reverse engineering it.
A 45-second song is pretty hard, and there was no that stuff. So Suno, looking at you, I'm impressed.
Well done, Mason.
Well, thanks for the prompt. And please we don't make any money off these podcasts, the Monkees, so don't come for us.
That's right.
Yeah.
No copyright.
Yeah, that is Last Train to Clarksville by the Monkees. Look it up. Don't listen to ours. Okay, great. All right. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you in 2 weeks with more stuff.
All right. See you in 2 weeks.
All right. Until next time, Nate.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning in to the Getting Smart podcast today. We want this podcast to be actionable, insightful, and a great way to learn about what's next in learning. In order to stay on the cutting edge, we need people in the field to tell us what they're hearing, what they're wanting, and what they're needing to learn more about. Got a topic or a guest in mind? Send your recommendations to me, Mason at gettingsmart.com. And if you like what you're hearing, don't forget to leave a review in Apple Podcasts or subscribe wherever you listen. Feel free to share the podcast on social